So thank you for being here tonight. My name is Michael Scholtes. I'm the pastor here at Prince of Peace Lutheran Church. I'm a lifelong Lutheran. I've been working full-time for the church for 22 years now. I'm also someone who lives with mental illness. Since childhood, I've lived with major depressive disorder, often called depression. The National Institute for Mental Health estimates that 21% of adults and 49.5% of adolescents in the United States have some sort of mental illness. 5.6% of adults and 11% of adolescents are estimated to have serious or severe mental illness. So I stand before you as part of those statistics. What I want to talk about tonight is what it's like to have both major depressive disorder and also a strong faith in God. I have a faith that tells me that I am created by and loved by God, that I have a purpose in this world, that I can and have made a difference, and yet I also have an illness that tells me that life has no meaning and the world would be better off without me. It tells me I'm worthless and unlovable. And that is a little strange. In fact, in my experience, it's downright weird to have faith and yet struggle in this way. Isn't faith supposed to take away this sort of feeling? But it doesn't, at least it hasn't in my case. I've spent time at the very knife's edge of suicide, convinced that that was the only choice. And yet I have a deep love and trust in the God revealed in Jesus Christ. I have felt in very real ways the Holy Spirit of God around and in me. And it's okay if you think that that's a little weird, because I do too. So what I plan to do in the next 30 minutes or so is first to tell you a little about my faith journey, how I got here, and then tell you a little about my journey of depression, how I got there. And third, I'll talk about the role that the church can play in helping people who have mental illness. And after that, I'll be happy to take some questions. The story I'm going to tell tonight is told in much greater detail in my book, Darkwater, a pastor's memoir of depression and faith. I'll be reading a few excerpts from this as part of the talk tonight, and I do have a table out in the narthex where you can pick up a copy, as well as sign up for a weekly newsletter I'm writing, and pick up some resource sheets as well. So my journey of faith, that started at English Lutheran Church in Minersville, Pennsylvania, when I was 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day old, the day I was baptized. Now, I don't remember that day all that well, but I know that it was then that God claimed me, that God named me, that God took me by the hand and said, "You are mine." That was the day it all started, through water and the Holy Spirit. Thank you for making me need water at that point. That was a nice touch. And I grew up in a parsonage. My father was a pastor, my mother was an organist. I was basically swimming in faith from infancy through adolescence. I took it for granted. I was always at church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school, confirmation class, youth group. During my teenage years, I attended dozens of youth events sponsored by the Northeastern Pennsylvania Synod. And after I graduated from college, I went straight to seminary, a school where people go to become pastors. But here's where it gets interesting. Because I did not want to become a pastor. In fact, I actively wanted not to be a pastor. Yet I went to seminary anyway and took all the classes, did the field education, simply because I wanted to learn more about my faith, explore the questions. I've always wanted to learn and discover more about God, find new images and new ways of thinking about God. Well, 3 years later, I graduated from seminary with a Master of Divinity degree and discovered that if you're not going to be a pastor, that degree doesn't really open a whole lot of doors. But I did find a job working as a director of Christian education at a church in Percy, and really enjoyed that job, at least at first. After 5 years there, though, I found that I was getting burned out. Now, I loved that congregation, I still do, and I loved the people, but I didn't love the work, at least not all of it. The weird thing was that I found that I really liked the parts of my job that were more pastoral. But the other side of it, the planning youth group ski trips and organizing lock-ins, was really draining me. But then the retreat happened. And I'll read a section from chapter 23. Right at the height of my burnout, I attended a 4-day retreat for new Lutheran church professionals and pastors held at a Roman Catholic retreat center in New Jersey. The retreat was designed as an experience to help young and inexperienced church leaders grow in their confidence and their roles. While I was there, I had a powerful experience during which God threw me on the ground and told me to shape up. But it was God, so it was done with grace and love. Shortly after checking in at the retreat center, I felt the urge to walk around outside, and I found a small cemetery on the center grounds. There were a few inches of snow on the grass, but the paved path that led around and through the cemetery had been cleared. It was a 5-minute walk to make a loop around it, and it felt special. The snow was covering the lower portion of the tombstones, so I couldn't read any of the names, but dozens of white crosses poked through the snow. I didn't know who these people were, but something about this little cemetery was holy. I felt I was in the presence of greatness here. I walked about 5 or 6 loops and then went back in the building. I found myself coming back to that cemetery over and over again throughout the retreat. I walked and walked and walked around, and as I walked, I began to hear a still small voice speaking to me. I wondered if I was hearing the voice of God. The voice told me things like this: "It's time to stop screwing around. It's time to listen to me. It's time to accept this. It's time to let me break through this enormous wall you've built." And I began to see that over many years I had built a wall around myself, a wall that said in big letters, "No pastors allowed." Well, each afternoon and each evening of the 4-day retreat, I walked around that cemetery. Over the course of the retreat, the snow melted, and along with it, so did my wall. As the snow melted, I was able to read the names on the tombstones more clearly. They were nuns. They were all nuns. Well, of course they were. This retreat center had originally been a convent. So this cemetery was a tribute to hundreds of nuns. I was walking in the footsteps of generations of women who answered God's call and who heard God's voice and responded. My own conversation with God continued as I walked. Over the days, I experienced exchanges like this. "I saw you made peace with a former classmate today. I'm glad you did that. Yes, she forgave me. I forgive you too. When can you forgive yourself?" And this: "I heard 6 people telling you today that you should really be a pastor. Yeah, they're all crazy. People have been saying that silly thing to me for years. Interesting." And this: "I saw you in that conflict management workshop this afternoon when you asked, 'What if I'm the one causing all the conflict?' Did you hear the leader's answer? Yes, he said, then there's hope. He said that if you recognize you're doing that, then it means you're ready to change." And finally this: "The retreat is over. Go home now. I will have more to say to you there." And like scales falling from my eyes, I finally saw what had been happening for years. I had actively stopped myself from becoming a pastor. When I returned from the retreat, I contacted my bishop and started the process. It took about 2.5 years, and while there were some hiccups and some tears, those years were so fulfilling and productive. And since I finally became ordained, I have found being a pastor has been a joy for me, at least most of the time. I feel like I've been fulfilling the role God set out for me. I've had the chance to explore and deepen my own faith while helping others to grow in theirs. I continue to explore my faith and grow in my faith just by doing my job. It's been marvelous. To me, faith means trust. Faith in God means that I trust that God is there. I trust that God is loving. I trust that God's grace is sufficient. I try to anyway. My faith is nowhere near perfect, but it's there. And through that faith, I see signs of God all around me. Acts of kindness, signs of beauty. I think often of my baptism. And I trust that God did something in that moment of water, something that has gone with me my whole life. That voice that I heard on the retreat has been in my head my whole life, whispering to me, "I love you. You are my beloved child, and through you I will change the world." However, that's not the only voice I have inside. I have another voice that has been with me since childhood, another voice that also tells me things about myself, and this voice is cruel, bitter, angry. I'm not sure when that voice started talking to me, but I know it was there in junior high school. It became brutally clear one evening when I was at the 9th grade awards night for my school. I'll read again from Darkwater, from chapter 3. I knew this would happen. Every year it happened. I always got a bunch of awards because I always had outstanding grades. I had been the whiz kid since kindergarten. I was always top of the class. I never had to work hard for it. It just came easily to me. School smarts were always a gift I had. But every time awards were given out, something felt wrong about it. I never felt proud or happy at these things. I felt awkward and confused instead. For a time, I tried to explain those feelings as a sense that these awards should be given for effort, and I knew that I didn't put nearly as much effort into schoolwork as other students. As I sat in the junior high auditorium that evening, the feelings were even more intense than usual. They started to coalesce into a bitter thought, into a single word: fraud. Every time I heard my name announced, I felt as though a voice in my head was shouting out, "Fraud." Every time I walked toward the stage, I felt something like a squeezing around my head, like a clutching in my chest. It was as though a voice were telling me, "You don't belong here. You are a fraud. They don't know who you really are. If they did, they would never have given this to you. You will never fulfill your potential. You are a sham, a con artist, a poser." Now, none of this was rational. I hadn't cheated or faked my way to anything. I had earned those awards honestly. But those feelings were so strong that I couldn't hear the voice of reason at all that night. And then the final awards: the American Legion Most Outstanding Boy and Most Outstanding Girl. Well, Amanda was called as runner-up for Most Outstanding Girl, and Clara was the winner. They were both still on stage as the runner-up for Most Outstanding Boy was announced. It was a kid named Gary who wasn't at the ceremony. I closed my eyes, my teeth clenched, and then I heard two voices together. From the stage, I heard my name being called, and from inside myself, I heard my other names: fraud, liar, imbecile, pretender. Now, I should be clear that this voice was never a literal voice. It's more like a part of the internal monologue we all have. It's never been a hallucination. I've never had trouble telling this voice apart from other people, but I've often had trouble distinguishing this voice from myself. That voice has never left me. The voice is still there to this very day. I've taken to calling it the dark voice. That voice is a big part of why I refused to be a pastor for so long. The voice told me I wasn't good enough. It's a part of me. He sees everything I do. He comments on it, telling me everything I've done wrong, like a cruel inner monologue, telling me I should have known better, telling me that people would be better off without me. He's very effective because he has access to all of my memories, and he's exactly as smart as I am. And he really doesn't like me. Now, I make it sound like the dark voice is a being, like a demon inside me or something. I don't believe that. I believe it's part of me. It's the metaphor that I use to explain my experience of depression. Talking about the dark voice is the way I've been able to make some sense of my feelings and thoughts. It's certainly not the only way to make sense of it. Many people experience it and interpret it differently. Many people think of depression as a disease of sadness, and that is indeed part of it. Depression can cause a deep sadness, sometimes in response to a stressful situation, and sometimes with no apparent trigger at all. But depression is also more than that. Depression causes distorted thinking that minor things are catastrophes, thinking that you are to blame for everything. Depression can also sap energy and motivation. For some people, getting out of bed is as difficult as climbing a mountain. Reaching out to talk to someone can feel like an impossible feat. Just getting a shower and getting dressed is a major accomplishment. And all the while, that voice is there, telling you that you're lazy, you're worthless, you're just making all this up for attention. And depression can also lead to thoughts and actions of suicide. I'll read to you an experience I had with that in my freshman year of college. That night, I gave in to the dark voice and finally admitted that he was right all along, that I was indeed worthless. It would in fact be better if I were not here. The world would be better off without me. And when I did that, he went silent. He left me alone. I sat on that cracked feeling for a few days. It was cold like concrete on a winter day. But it was quiet in my head, and the pain was gone. It had always hurt so much to wonder if I was worthless. Now I felt there was no wondering anymore. It was a certainty. I felt a sense of calm, peace, direction. The feeling was cold and raw, but calm. It was only a matter of time. I just needed to work this out, calmly, patiently, slowly. During my classes, I made notes about methods in the margins of my notebooks. A gun wasn't an option because I wouldn't even know where to get one. While I was eating in the cafeteria, I thought about poison. What foods could I combine? Or was there a way to break into the chemistry lab and steal chemicals? Or break into the health center and steal medicine? Well, I didn't know enough about either field to know what to get. And I was no burglar. I'd probably get caught. What would happen then? Well, I'd get kicked out of college and lose any chance of doing this gracefully. I wondered why suicide had to be so difficult. Why can't we just will ourselves to die, I thought. Why does it take so much effort to just stop living? And then as I was walking around campus, I saw a tall tree with long horizontal branches. That's it. That would work. All I needed was a noose. But I wouldn't do it here on campus because I'd get caught way too easily. It had to be somewhere more secluded where I could do it without being disturbed. Later that day, I walked down the hill to a park a few blocks off campus. I walked around examining the trees. It had to be the right height, the right strength, the right hiddenness. This park wasn't exactly wooded, but there were a few spots here and there with groups of trees. I found a patch of mature hemlocks and walked in. Their branches were full and hung low to the ground, so there was enough seclusion. I looked at each of the branches and found one that looked easily climbable. I grabbed hold of a low limb and climbed up. I was standing on a good solid branch about 10 feet off the ground, and I could reach up to another one that was just as strong. This would do. I was done looking. This was it. I stood there on that branch, holding onto the one above, the one that would soon hold a noose. I will stand here again, I thought, and I will take my last breath here. I felt tears well up in the corners of my eyes, but they did not fall. I stared into the distance, seeing the sun's light low in the west, trying to shine through gray clouds. I shivered. This is right, I told myself. And I believed it. I was ready for this. It was long overdue. I just needed to keep control. Just tamp down any nagging feelings of changing my mind just long enough to do it. I climbed back down. It had to be soon. I couldn't wait long. I went home to think about what I'd need. I needed to think of everything. I'm going to come back to that night in a moment, but for now I want you to see how twisted my thoughts became, how isolated I felt. I thought that no one could ever understand me, and no one could ever really understand who I was and what I was. The real me was so broken and twisted and deserved to die. Now, after that suicide attempt, I ended up spending 11 days at a psychiatric hospital in Wilkes-Barre. I had not wanted to go there, but it became a very important and helpful experience for me, and I've always been grateful for it. It was the first time I really understood that I needed help and that there was help out there. And when I was discharged, I thought I was cured. Now everything would be better. I would never be depressed again. Well, predictably, that was not the case. I still have some very bad days and some very bad months. Just last fall, I spent 2 weeks in the partial hospitalization program at Lehigh Valley Hospital after a particularly bad episode. I've come to accept that the dark voice is a companion who will always be with me. However, I don't want you to think that I have no hope. I have a tremendous amount of hope. And I told you I'd finish the story of my 18-year-old suicide attempt. Here's the end of that story. I reached the limb I had stood on the day before and reached up to grab the limb above. I removed the bungee cord I was wearing as a belt and wrapped it around my neck. I reached up to wind it around the branch above me. I was crying. My survival instinct was kicking in, and a big part of me did not want to do this. But another part was so sure that I had to do it. Once I jumped, there would be no going back, just a snap, and that would be the end. Yes, here we go. I'm going to do this. I have to do this. This is right. This is right. God, oh God, give me the strength to do this. And I saw a light in the distance. Near the horizon, a bright light suddenly shone. It was a beacon, a lighthouse shining in the darkness. Now, it was probably just a street light coming on or someone opening their garage door, but all I saw was light. Nothing more, just a flash of brightness amid the dark. And to me in that moment, it was a sign. The surest sign I'd ever seen. It was the star of Bethlehem shining in the sky, the star that once led the Magi to the Christ child. It was the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. It was the light of the world, not hidden under a bushel, but out in the open for all to see. It was a sign from God, from the Lord, from my light and salvation. It was a message from God saying, no. I could almost hear the voice of God saying to me, no, do not do this. Climb back down. My tears started flowing more freely. I felt their warmth on my face, and I felt released. I sat down on the limb of the tree, leaning against the trunk. I felt sap all over the leg of my jeans, but I didn't care. I could feel its tackiness. I could feel. The branch beneath me felt sturdy and hard. The air on my face felt chilly and damp. The cord still wrapped around my neck felt taut, and I quickly pulled it off and dropped it on the ground. I was here. I was breathing, and I was going to keep going. God had spoken to me. God had sent me a sign. I felt seen. I felt real. I felt present. God was with me that night. And God is still with me. Even though I struggle, God is with me. Not always the same way, but I believe that God is steadfast, always walking beside me, always keeping watch, always wanting me to grow and experience God's love and share it. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes stepping in to help. I believe God saved my life that night, and I believe God has done that on other occasions as well. There's a story in the Gospel of Luke that illustrates the way I experience life with both depression and faith. You might remember it. It goes something like this. On the day that Jesus was raised from the dead, 2 of his disciples were walking along the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus, about a 7-mile journey. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened, and then a stranger joined them. It was Jesus, but they were kept from recognizing him. The stranger said to them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" They stopped and looked down to the ground. And then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, said, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know everything that's happened here over the past few days?" He asked them, "What's happened?" They said to him, "Jesus of Nazareth happened. We thought he was the Messiah. We thought he'd save us all, but the leaders crucified him. And that was 3 days ago. And just this morning, some of our friends said they saw him alive, but that's too much to hope for." Well, then Jesus talked to them and began to explain to them how Scripture had prophesied that all this would happen, but they still didn't recognize him. When they reached Emmaus, they invited him to stay with them. So he went in and took his seat at the table. He took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them, and suddenly their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to one another, "Weren't our hearts burning inside us as he was talking to us along the road, as he opened the Scriptures to us?" And they left immediately and ran back to Jerusalem. These 2 disciples were walking along the road, grieving. And in the midst of their grief and sorrow, Jesus was there. He walked with them. He walked with them in their grief. He didn't take that grief away, but he accompanied them. And then when the time was right, he opened their hearts and minds. That's my experience of life. My life has grief and sorrow in it. And Jesus doesn't take that grief away, but he walks with me through it, and sometimes opens my heart and mind. I think accompaniment is a great way to think about how to help people with mental illness. It's so important for people with mental illness to know that someone is walking with them, because it can be a very isolating experience. Sometimes people pull away from others because of their own distorted thinking and their own difficult emotions. And on top of that, sometimes people don't talk about it at all, putting on a mask because mental illness still has a stigma attached to it. The stigma is not as bad as it used to be, but it is still there. Mental illness has sometimes been described as a non-casserole disease. Often when someone is sick, family and friends will show up at their door with casseroles. It's a great way to show that you care. But when someone is diagnosed with a mental illness, Casseroles don't always show up. People don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They stay away for fear of making things worse or saying the wrong thing, or perhaps just out of their own discomfort. But that stigma doesn't have to be there. And I have to say that I have not experienced that at Prince of Peace. I've been open with this congregation from the beginning, and they have walked with me. They've treated me like a normal human being. They've accepted me. About 6 years ago, when I faced a particularly bad depression, this congregation not only offered me some time off to get the help I needed, but considered it a medical leave and paid my full salary for 3 months while I got that help. And just last year, they gave me 2 weeks off for some further help. Now, I'm not sure everybody here understands depression, but that's okay. One of the great gifts they've given me is believing that it's real, whether they understand it or not. They've validated me, told me that I'm worthwhile, even though I'm a mess. That has been life-giving for me. And I believe it's been good for the congregation as well. There are a number of people in this church who have shared with me their own experience with depression or anxiety. I believe we're more open about it here than in many churches, and I'm grateful for that. So let's talk for a minute about what churches and individual Christians can do. I think the most important thing that you can do for people with mental illnesses is validate them. Tell them that you see them, that God sees them. No, that's not fair. Don't tell them I'm one of them. Tell us that you see us and that God sees us. Tell us that you love us and that God loves us. Let us know that it's okay that we have a mental illness, that it isn't a moral weakness. Invite us to share our stories like I am tonight. Tell us it's not our fault that we're experiencing this. Tell us that God loves us, wants healing for us, but just like with any disease, that healing doesn't always come with a cure. Walk with us. Like Cleopas and his friend, walk with us in our grief. Be patient with us at the bad times when we're not at our best. Show us that we're not alone. And maybe bit by bit, over time, we'll hear the good news that God is walking with us too. Another way you can help is to put together a list of resources in your area, such as counselors, psychiatric facilities, support groups, and so forth. Have that list available for people when they need it. Encourage us to make use of that when we need it. And certainly the church can pray. Keep people with mental illness in the public prayers of your church. Pray for us on your own and tell us that you're praying for us. That means a lot. Let the church be a welcoming place, a place where people are welcome, no matter who they are and what struggles they face. And I've learned that one of the worst ways to be welcoming is to make it seem like everybody in the church has their act together. Because that sends a message that if you don't have your act together, you're not welcome. Let the church be a place where we can be honest, that we're all messes in our own way. A place where we show each other what our real identity is. Our identity isn't having our act together. Our identity isn't our job, it isn't our intelligence or our personality, it isn't our skin color, our political party, our religion, or our illness. Let the church be the place where we tell each other, your identity is beloved child of God, and the place where we welcome one another in that light. My name is Michael. I live with mental illness, I serve as a pastor, and my identity is beloved child of God. Thank you for your time tonight.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I feel like it takes great courage and to admit that there's something that you feel isn't right, and to be able to stand up and talk about it to the congregation, to write about it in a book, to put it out there. I think that takes amazing courage, and I think all of us, there are things that we would be afraid for other people to know about.
Sure.
So I don't have a question to ask you, but I just wanted to say that I admire your strength to put stuff in words, to try to help maybe other people who are struggling with stuff to know that they're not alone, or to let other people know they're not alone, even if they're struggling with something that's not depression. They're struggling with something else.
Right.
We're all struggling with something. It's just
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thank you. I think one of the things that I've really tried to do in my time at Prince of Peace, and I'm certainly trying to do with the book and with all the talks I'll be doing, is to normalize it and say this isn't a failure. This doesn't mean you're less of a person or less of a Christian or anything. It's a thing that some of us have, and it's okay. So yeah, thank you for that.
What role do you see some of the writing efforts that you've made in terms of trying to help manage your depression?
Oh, it's therapy. It really is. It absolutely is. I mean, a lot of this. I've journaled my whole life, and a lot of, especially, a book like this is essentially a huge journal, and I think, in my experience, I find that writing about something that happened to me or something I experienced allows me to make a lot more sense of it than I do in my own head. I think in English, but when I get things out on paper, I realize I think in some gibberish language that makes no sense until I get it out, because I suddenly realize, oh, that's what's happening. And working so hard on this, this wasn't as simple as just putting something down on paper. I had a lot of editing that went into it, and I came to terms with a lot of things through it. It was helpful, and I encourage anybody who finds writing to be a good, a helpful way to get things out to do that with whatever experience you have, whether you want to get it published or not. Just to put that on paper makes a big difference.
So with some of the people that you've worked with at some of the different facilities or places that you have gone to, do they say that there's no real cure for depression, that you just have ways to try to help manage it or recognize when it's becoming harder to deal with, or can somebody be, quote, cured of depression?
That is a really good question, and I think the best I can answer that is that the jury is still out on that. I think different clinicians, different therapists, different doctors have different answers to that question. And the other thing is even figuring out what the actual kind of cause of it is really up in the air. They know that SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they know that they make a difference, but I don't think they understand quite why. There's something going on in the brain that helps with, but they're not sure exactly why, and it doesn't work for everybody. There are some people for whom medicine is a life changer. There's some people for whom medicine doesn't do anything. Some people for whom talk therapy is the only answer, and some people from talk therapy doesn't do anything. It's a tough thing. I think some people can get out of it. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but I feel like after living with it for 30, 40 some years that this is probably my life, but I'm okay with the idea that I can manage this. A lot of people have physical illnesses that they can't beat, but they can manage and live full lives with, and that's kind of the way I interpret this, and that may not be everybody's experience.
Do you find that things that have helped you manage or cope with depression have worked at some period of your life, and then you move on to the same techniques that seem to work, and then you have to come up with other techniques or find them?
Absolutely, and sometimes I wonder if that's because I've grown out of a certain technique or because I just always need something new, and I don't know which it is. But yeah, I do need to do new things from time to time. I do need to I knew somebody who used to refer to going to a counselor as his monthly tune-up, and I think there's a sense in which that's true, and I know that I need to keep doing this even when I feel like everything's okay, because it's not going to be okay eventually. But yeah, I often come to these revelations where I know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to, add this to my day, or I'm going to take this medicine or whatever. And it works for a while. And you can probably, vouch for this. It really works for a while.
Yep.
And then it doesn't as much. Yeah. And it's so hard to know. It's so hard to know, am I really susceptible to placebo? Or do I just need something new every couple months? Or what? And I don't know if I'll ever know that answer, but I just need to keep trying. Anything else?
For those of us who are around folks with depression,
Yeah.
family members, perhaps what's your best advice or your best advice as far as, when to connect, when to back off, when to, because, we have some experience in our family as well, and it's sometimes when you push a little bit too much, then there's no contact, or, you just kind of wonder.
Yeah. And a lot of that brings up questions of boundaries and questions of codependency. You might be a better person to answer this.
I'm not sure I have an answer either. I think it really depends so much on the person and the relationship and what helps them. I often don't know how to help you. Sometimes, especially when you're not in the midst of a difficult depression, we've talked about it, and I've asked him what he needs when he's there. Sometimes maybe I'll help him and give him that, and sometimes I'm not. And I think I have to there.
I think when I've been kind of in the frame of mind to get the help I need, I've found you to be a great source of accountability for me. That you can kind of hold me accountable. Are you doing the things you said you were going to do? Are you kind of keeping track of this stuff? But if it's somebody who, isn't recognizing they have a problem or isn't getting the help they need, there's only so much you can do, and that's really hard because some people just don't want to accept it, or they've been told that it's a sign of failure, or you're not a real man, or you're not a real adult, or whatever. I wish I could give you a better answer than that.
Sometimes I think people just knowing that you care and knowing that you are thinking about them, even if there's nothing that you can do, just that they're aware that you recognize that they're having a difficult time, that they're in a deep depression, and that you're there for them, even if you don't have an answer. Sometimes I think that can help.
Yeah. And maybe that's kind of like what I talked about walking with them, is to just say, look, I don't understand what you're going through, but I know you're going through something, and if you want anything from me, I'm here. Maybe just to say something like that, and then let it go as best you can. I don't know.
When did you get your idea, to actually write the book?
Oh, that happened. That happened during my medical leave, actually.
First one?
6 years ago, the big one. I was blogging a lot then, and I started, among other things, started doing this. I wrote a blog about one of the chapters in the book. I don't remember which one it was. Some experience of depression in my past. I just kind of wrote it out as a vignette, and I got so much feedback from it from various people. I thought, well, I'll try writing another memory from this, and found that people were really responding to those memories. So I wrote something like 20 of them. I called them snapshots of my depression, and after I kind of got all those up on my blog, I looked at it and thought, this could be a book. And I started playing with that and adding to it, and that's really, that's where it grew from. It really started out with those blogs. And it was quite a journey to get here, and it's in very different shape than it was when I first submitted it to a publisher too. They were some really good editors, but yeah. Okay, thank you.